Hello everybody, Alyne Hart here. So today what we're going to be talking about is all about writing sex scenes. Now before we get into the naughty business, yes, I did move my desk into a different area of the house. I'm upstairs right in the center of my home. I have a window for some natural lighting. I think it makes the videos a little bit nicer. My desk and backdrop got a little bit of a makeover, so I think it's a little bit more interesting to look at instead of looking at my mug. And hopefully once winter comes, having the window and the natural light will help me combat a little bit of seasonal depression. And plus it's just nicer up here. Considering the topic of today's video, you should know that we will be talking about very adult things and using adult language. So if words that rhyme with schmuck, clock, and mussy offend you, you might want to change this video because we'll be using the real words today. So the first thing you need to know before writing a sex scene is what level of sex scene are you writing and what is expected of your genre. There's everything from sweet romance to erotica, and so what do all of those mean? In a sweet romance, you're going to have what's called closed-door sex scenes. We might see a chaste kiss, but you're definitely not going to get in on any of the action, and in fact, sometimes the action may not even be implied. The fade to black scene, you get a little bit of the buildup, you get the kissing, some of the sexier actions, but then just kind of like in a TV show, it fades to black and the sex is implied. And there's steamy romance, which is what I write. And the sex is not the main focus of the book, although if you are in love, you're probably having some hot sex. And so that gets included in the book, but it's not the main focus of the book. And typically every sex scene does have a purpose. Then there is erotic romance, where the sex is a lot more frequent, very explicit, but it is not the main focus of the book. There's usually a very compelling plot, and romance is still the main focus of the storyline. And there's just flat out erotica, where the story is sex focused. There might not even be a romance at all. It's pretty much just pure pornography put down on paper. It can be done very well, but it is not the same as erotic romance or a steamy romance. Again, it's important here to know your audience, and if you're going to call your book erotica and it's actually just a steamy contemporary romance, you're probably going to get really bad reviews because the consumers who are reading erotica are reading it purely for the explicit sex, where you're giving them a storyline and maybe 2 to 3 sex scenes at most. And again, if you are selling yourself as sweet romance and you have an explicit sex scene, again, you've got a big problem. So know your genre expectations, read books within your genre, and then you'll get a better idea of what these kind of scenes look like. Number 2, don't be afraid of the words. If it's a cock, call it a cock or a dick. You don't need to use crazy bodice ripper words like rod or shaft or turgid tool. What are all the crazy words that they used to use way back in the day before they could say those words? Use the words. And again, instead of saying warm, womanly center or slick, wet folds or whatever crazy other words we can come up with, just call a pussy a pussy. Hearing words like that and reading words like that, it titillates the brain a little bit and tells you that something is kind of naughty. Now, I'm not saying you need to use those words throughout the entire thing because, again, we're writers, we're not going to be repetitive and keep repeating the same words and make it boring, but use them 1 or 2 times, because if you are writing an erotic romance or even a steamy romance and you're trying to come up with crazy words just to avoid saying cock and pussy, then you've got a different kind of problem on your hands. Again, if it's fucking, call it fucking. You don't need to make up crazy words to talk about what it is that your character's doing and the different body parts. Now, once you've used the big bad words and you are trying to come up with other ways to describe the body parts or the actions being done to said body parts, there are a couple of books that I do really like. Thinking Like a Romance Writer is a fantastic book. It has all kinds of word variations for a lot of different things. You can see that I have a lot of it dog tagged. If you're looking for different words to go along with body parts or actions being done to body parts, this is a fantastic book. I can't recommend it enough. It has gotten an incredible amount of use in my own writing. This is the next one that I bought. I haven't used this too much. It's the Sexosaurus. Again, just gives you some more words to use instead of having to come up with crazy bonkers things. This will really help you out a lot. I know the first time that I wrote a sex scene in a book, the first time I used all the dirty words, and then I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I shouldn't use all those words. And I went through and I literally put in all the like bodice ripper, like Fabio romance days words and reread it, and it was so ridiculous. I couldn't even stand it. So then I went in and I did a mix of the naughty words and some of the prettier purple prose kind of words, and that mix seemed to work for me. So find what you're comfortable with, but again, don't be afraid of using those words. Because believe me, if you're writing a sex scene and your reader likes to read sex scenes, those words are not going to turn them off. Number 3, avoid IKEA sex. Now, right now you might be thinking, what does writing sex scenes have to do with Swedish ready-to-assemble furniture? It has a lot to do with Swedish ready-to-assemble furniture. So think about a piece of IKEA furniture. It's very insert tab A into slot B. Not the kind of sex you want to be having on your pages. When all you're doing is describing the mechanics of sex, basically inserting tab A into slot B, it's going to get pretty boring pretty fast. A really hot, really sexy sex scene is going to include all of the 5 senses: sights, sounds, taste, smell, and touch. All of these things incorporated into a sex scene make it a lot more visceral and a lot more tactile and draws your reader into the sex scene. For me, when I'm writing a sex scene, I first want to get the mechanics of it right. So I am writing IKEA sex for my first draft, because I want to make sure that if I remember that he touched a certain part of her body at one point, that he's still touching that part of her body at the next point. Or if I have him thrusting here, I want him doing it the same there when I'm still describing the same point of the story. I go back in and I pretty it up. What is that point of view? What are they seeing? Like, what are they smelling? Is it cologne? Like, even talking about the different smells of sex. It might sound really gross talking about it, but again, it's that thing that just makes it a more tangible and more touchable and really a compelling, exciting, sexy, hot sex scene, which is exactly what you want. Number 4, your characters are unique, which means they have unique sex. If you're writing in a dual point of view, the way that you're going to describe sex from the male point of view versus the female point of view is going to be completely different, because the way they experience sex is completely different. Also, don't regurgitate all of your old sex scenes. That's going to get completely boring. If you know your characters inside and out, then each of your characters is going to have a different kind of sex, and no sex scene in any book should ever be exactly the same. So what do I mean by that? So for example, in Rocking Autumn, my character Jax is an alpha male. He's very bossy, he's very impulsive, he's really hot, he's really sexy, he likes to say dirty words, and he has a little bit of a kink for choking. And so I include that in his sex. Everything that he does is really impulsive and really hot and really sexy and things without thinking, and that's what makes the sex that they have so explosive. So then I moved on to the space between us, and the character Dean is a boxer, and he's described a lot as kind of being a grenade about to explode. He has a lot of pent-up emotions, he has a lot of anger, he has a lot of inner turmoil. Now, when he's having sex, inside, all he wants to do is just pin her down and ravage her. He uses the sex to show Emma how much he cares about her because she's a virgin and he wants to take things slow. So while it's really, really sexy and he's trying to hold himself back, there is one scene where we do get that explosive, hot, crazy sex. And then again, in How We Fall, I have Finn, who is a completely different character, who again is an alpha male. He's a little bit bossy, but he's a really more on the sensual and sweet side. And his style of sex shows that. All of my characters do kind of have their own little kinks. Like I said, Jax likes a little bit of light choking, Dean likes to hear his name being said, and Finn likes to include food in his sex. And that's what makes each sex scene in those books unique, because those characters are unique and the sex that they're having in each book is unique. How many times can I say unique? Number 5, don't be afraid of the not perfect sex. Yes, the sex that people are having in books is probably 100 times better than the sex that people are having in real life. The guys get hard on a whim. The sex lasts forever. It's always mind-blowing and everyone has an orgasm. But sex scenes can also be real and raw and gritty and not perfect. Don't be afraid to include the ugly parts of sex. Because while the sex that they're having is mind-blowing, it can also be a complete and total train wreck. And that would be totally okay. Carpet burn, the way latex tastes when someone's putting on a condom, fumbling with a condom, a lack of grace when passion hits, coming too fast. It's okay to include all these things in your sex scenes because it's going to make it a little bit more real for your reader, and they're going to remember that about you. So I've definitely written scenes where the guy totally is fumbling with a condom and thinks he's going to screw the whole thing up, and then he gets the damn thing on, and when they finally get down to business, he almost comes way too fast because he's too excited. Or I've written scenes where the guy typically has like moves that he uses on every single girl, and once he gets to boning this one chick, he loses his mind and he's pretty much like a horny 14-year-old. And that's okay. That makes your sex scenes different, and it shows a little bit of realness and a little bit of grit and a little bit of rawness, and that is what readers want from a good sex scene. They want to connect with it somehow, and they want it to be memorable. Number 6, build up to the sex scene, create sexual tension. Basically, what you want to do is tease and torture your poor characters until they, i.e. you, can't take it anymore and they have to have sex. You can lead up to that sex scene by interrupting them when they're about to do it, or maybe create that perfect fight where the sexual tension just builds up too much and all of a sudden they're just like banging on a table somewhere. It's the excitement leading up to that sex scene that really creates that moment for your reader. If you're writing sex just to write sex, or if you're writing sex just to gain a word count, then maybe you need to rethink what it is you're writing. But that build up to the sex scene is usually the best part because you're like, finally, and you're just as excited as they are about it happening. About what the risk is by them having sex. What's the reaction to the action? Again, what's the action leading up to the reaction? All this is going to create the perfect sexual tension so that when that scene finally comes along, everyone is praising hallelujah and you can't wait for it to happen. Number 7, do your research. Now, by this, I don't mean get on Pornhub and watch endless hours of porn, unless misogyny and people spitting on each other is your bag, which, if it is, more power to you. What I mean by that is know what you're talking about. If you're writing things like male-male erotica, fetishes, or even BDSM, you're going to want to know what you're talking about. If you're writing threesomes or sex from a male perspective, again, it's best to know what you're talking about. Now, BDSM in books is not my thing, but I know a poorly written one when I read one. Is your character actually a dom, or are they just an asshole who likes spanking chicks? You need to know what you're talking about. If you're writing a real BDSM book with a dom and a sub and dungeon and play and all kinds of things, you should know what you're talking about. If you don't know what acronyms like RAC, SSC, or even BDSM stand for, you're going to want to do some research. If you don't know what an actual scene negotiation looks like, or even what that means, again, you're going to want to do some research. If you're writing male-male erotica and you're not including lubricant in the act, you might have a problem. Unless pain is what you're going after there, that doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. If you're writing a threesome and you've never had one, and you don't know the mechanics of how one works, again, you're going to want to do some research. For me, my favorite thing is writing sex from the male perspective. In fact, writing anything from the male perspective is my favorite thing. I just think it's really fun. But to write sex from a male perspective, I relentlessly hounded male friends. What was it like to have a boner? What does it feel like to stick a penis in somebody? And what does it actually feel like when you come? I asked all these questions because I really wanted to know. I wanted to get it right. And yes, for a book that I wrote that did have threesomes, I did watch a little bit of pornography just to make sure that I was getting the mechanics of it down right and that what I was explaining was actually physically possible. Number 8, include emotion in your sex. Your sex scene needs to bear your characters, not just physically. Love, anger, vulnerability, selfishness, all of these things have a place in a sex scene. Characters' bodies are exposed, their minds need to be exposed as well. How does the sex change things between them? Does it break down some walls between characters? Does the man whore character actually finally feel a connection other than something physical? Does the girl who didn't trust suddenly feel like maybe this could be the guy that she lets down her walls for? What did they learn about themselves and what did they learn about the other person through this experience? An emotion must be tied to the act to make it a romance. Because if you aren't connecting emotion to the act of sex, then you probably aren't writing a romance. As you're including those 5 senses, also make sure you're including the thoughts going through the character's mind, or maybe even what happens after the act. As I mentioned in The Space Between Us, there's a scene where ready to explode Dean actually finally has the ready to explode grenade sex with Emma. But then right afterwards, they have a total emotional breakthrough where he expresses some things to her about his past and some of his scars physically and emotionally that she didn't know before, and it actually brought them a little bit closer. It's things like this that are going to make your romance, again, just a little bit more tangible and a little bit more real for your reader. Number 9, get in the mood. Basically, prepare yourself to write the sex scene. If you haven't cooked dinner yet and your dog needs a walk and your husband is playing Xbox in the living room and your kids are running around wanting a grilled cheese sandwich, you're not exactly going to be in the mood to write a sex scene. Some people have little rituals that they do. I like to take a bubble bath for real and have a glass of wine, and I have a playlist that I use. And I do turn down the lights in my room and I light some candles and I let my family know that I'm going to be busy. I put in my headphones and I write my sex scenes without interruption. You could get on Tumblr and look at some sexy gifs and get yourself in the mood that way. But whatever you do, make sure that you're in the mood to actually write a sex scene. If your house is chaotic, or if your mind is chaotic, or you've got too much going on, or you're just not in a sexy mood, skip the sex scene and then come back to it another time when you are feeling like you want to write something sexy. And number 10, don't write things that you aren't comfortable with. If you have sweet romance running through your veins, but you think that you need to write an erotic romance just because that's what readers want, then it's going to show. There is a readership for every heat level in romance. So don't write things that you aren't comfortable with and you don't want people to read. If you're uncomfortable with the things that you're writing and you'd be embarrassed if people found out, then that's going to show in the things that you're writing. Or if you're not comfortable using the strong language and writing explicit sex scenes, then you might want to rethink what genre that you put yourself in. You're not going to lose a readership because there are plenty of readers who actually don't want to read about the sex. And so if you aren't comfortable writing it, then don't write it. Comfort with these things takes a while. And this is my favorite story that I've ever told. And I tell everybody the story about my first book. Now, if you've ever read my first book, it is The Island. It has been pulled off the shelves because I am rewriting it. But that baby is packed full of sex. Now, I do tell people I have calmed down a lot since writing that book, but I think there's literally probably 15 sex scenes in that book. My mom really, really wanted to read some of my writing, and I was pretty much over my dead body while I let my mom read about a 3-way romance. I took my manuscript and I literally pulled out every single sex scene, printed it up, and gave it to her to read. Now, we were on vacation, and so I'm sitting across from her while she's reading this book. Got to the point where she was pounding the table and saying, "I don't even get the shower sex. Why aren't you even just giving me the shower sex?" She got so mad that she got on Amazon and she bought the book, and let me tell you, she's read that baby like 5 times. Is that kind of horrifying for me to think about? Absolutely. Would I want my brother or my kids to read it? Probably not. But my mom has actually become one of my biggest fans, and she's not even a reader of romance. And the genre that she does read, there's literally no sex in it. But she likes my stories, she likes the romance, and she likes the hot guys, and she likes the sex in my books. And so again, it's because I do have a comfort level with that. And now that we got that out of the way, it's not that big of a deal to me. My coworkers know that I write sexy books. All my friends know that I write sexy books. It's just not that big of a deal to me. I know even like people have said like, "Oh, I read one of your sex scenes while I was in the break room at work." And at first that was kind of like embarrassing to me. Now I'm just like, not a big deal. But I'm comfortable with it. I'm comfortable writing it. I'm comfortable with people knowing that I write it. And I have fun writing it. So the main takeaway is just have fun with it, experiment. Enlist the help of beta readers if you feel like you are having that IKEA sex. Get a seasoned beta reader or even another author to read your work and really help you work out some tips. And don't be afraid to just go in there and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite that sex scene until it is just so hot that it's bursting off the pages and might even make Kindles explode into flames. So I hope that today's video was helpful. I know that writing sex can be a little bit daunting. It can be a little bit terrifying. It sounds like when you first start writing romance, it sounds like it's going to be the funnest part of it, but honestly, it can be the scariest part and one of the hardest things to do right. So if you liked today's video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and hit that little notification bell so that you know every time I post a new video. And I will be back next week with Alyne Taylor. We'll be talking all about narrators and everything you wanted to know about creating an audiobook. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.